Welcome to On the Money. I'm Mark Hamrick from Bankrate.com and during the pandemic from my house. We're so glad to have you join us today. Our goal here is to connect the dots with things that are going on in the world with your money, your personal finances, and there is no one any better in the world to join us today than our friend Michelle Singletary. She's a syndicated columnist for the Washington Post, and her award-winning column, The Color of Money, appears twice a week in dozens of newspapers across the country. Her column is a must-read. If you're not already reading it, it's the first thing I check out in the Washington Post when it arrives in my driveway in the morning. Michelle, so excited to have you join us for this first edition of On the Money.
Yeah, I'm so honored to be the first guest. That's just so wonderful.
Let's start off with the title of your column, The Color of Money. Tell us the story about how that came to pass and really how it's now very much part of your brand.
Yeah, lots of people think that it's just about race, but it's not. When I was a co-reporter at the Post, I'd be telling all these stories about my grandmother who taught me pretty much all the basic stuff I know about money. And my editor was like, you need to write a column, you need to put this out there. And so as we were brainstorming for a title, the one thing I said is that I want to be sure that it isn't just seen as a column written by a Black woman, or that it be focused only on issues that would relate to Black. And so when we thought about it, we thought, well, why not Color of Money? Because it was not like we were running away from my background, but also we all need money. So the color of money is green and it applies to all of us. And then we were like, Eureka, there it is. So to embrace who I am, my culture, who taught me about money, but also that it transcends everything, right? We all, have to have this thing to buy our homes and buy our groceries and save for retirement. And so that's why we came up with The Color of Money.
And we talked about your culture and how you came about the learnings that make you who you are today. I know there is nobody more important than Big Mama. Yeah, who's Big right. Mama?
So Big Mama has been a character in my column from day one. In fact, that was the first column about how I learned about money. And the headline was my grandmother's savings grace, because she was the one who taught me the importance of saving. She hated debt. She passed that on to me. And I use her as sort of the person that I write to when I write my columns. People always, as a columnist, you sort of have to envision your reader. And my reader is folks like my grandmother, people who know money, but maybe not know all the intricate details, or maybe scared as things change and evolve. And so she has been present the entire time. I always think about her as I'm writing. Would she understand this? Is this important to her?
Your column is really a textbook example of how to do it. And I'm so excited to hear about the book that you've written, which is really sort of a launch pad right now to remind people why it's so important to basically, I'm going to use the word bulletproof their personal finances. The title of the book is what? And give me the idea about what you're hoping to achieve with it.
So the title is actually pretty simple: What to Do with Your Money When Crisis Hits, a Survival Guide. And the publisher came to me and said, there are a lot of people have a lot of basic questions right now. And they're the same questions that happen every time there's an economic downturn. And so I wanted to write a book that was quick and easy and people could get through it and maybe just go to the part that is important to them. So it's written like an FAQ, frequently asked questions. And it's sort of more pithy. I sort of liken it to heavy hors d'oeuvres. You ever go to a party? And they're heavy hors d'oeuvres, right? And you can make a meal out of it, not be hungry. Really, it's a way to satisfy that appetite. You know that you still probably gonna need to get a meal. Because with financial books, they can be so dense. Let's be truthful, right? It's important information that people need to know. But who wants to sit down for a 200-page book about what you should do with your money? I mean, my eyes glass over and I write this stuff. And so I wanted to have a book that was, people could say, for example, listen, I lost my job. Which bills do I pay? And just give you a little bit of a guideline. Okay, so when that happens, your credit card is not going to get paid. Maybe even your student loans. You got to put a roof over your head and food on the table. And right now, that's what you need to be concerned about. And in some instances, not even paying that mortgage or that rent. You got a little bit of a leeway on that. But when it's essential things, that's what you have to focus on. And I want to give people permission to not sit there and figure out things that they don't need to pay right now. Or can I apply for unemployment insurance benefits? My relative came to me for a loan. They lost their job. Should I lend them the money? In the past, they really haven't paid me back the money I used to lend them. What should I do? And so I wanted to kind of give them the guidelines, just as if someone would call me. This is what I do. I get the calls from relatives and friends, text messages. Hey, this came across. What should I do? This book is to give you a guideline, a place to start. So, and I give lots of resources. In fact, Bankrate.com is all through the book because I'm not juicing you up. This is what, there are 50 websites that I go to pretty much every week. Bankrate.com, FTC.gov, because they have so much consumer information, IRS.gov. I live on these sites. And not just because I'm writing about it, because me personally, when I'm trying to help somebody to figure out how they can pay off their credit card sooner than 20 years, I go right to the calculator on Bankrate.com and show them how these extra payments can make such a huge difference. When someone's asking me about a tax question, I say, hey, IRS has a website. In fact, if you owe the IRS, this is where you should go. I know you think I'm not going to call the IRS. They're going to just run after me for the money. But that website, where you know where to go, has such good information. And so that's the sort of point of this book. It's like having a little Michelle on your shoulder. Say, hey, this is what you should do, and here's where you need to go.
Well, thank you. First of all, that means so much coming from you because, you are a trusted authority, and to have you say that means the world to me and to us. And Michelle, I'm thinking about the fact that we're, as we mentioned, we're talking right now during the pandemic, but as we record this, in recent weeks, there was a devastating storm that occurred in the state of Texas. And all of a sudden that sort of stamps or pushes the pandemic out of the news in a way. And it reminds people that natural climate-related events, weather-related events, wildfires, that's a great reason for people to want to read this book. Is like, you know what? It could be something totally out of my control, like a pandemic, like a wildfire, like a snowstorm, like a power outage. I'm thinking emergency savings is pretty much at the top of the list there. What do you think?
It's absolutely, and I'm so glad that you talked about that, because that is also the point of the book, that right now, as we record this, we're in the middle of the pandemic. But hey, folks, there's going to be another crisis. It may be another year, it may be 2 years, but that's the cycle that we live in. We live in life, and life happens. And there's going to be a hurricane, there's going to be a tornado, somebody in your family is going to get sick. And so this is sort of a living book to say, yeah, the Great Recession was, when it was, but hey, there's going to be another one. And I didn't want people to be fearful, but you've got to always be prepared for the next thing that's going to happen. And I know that people, they handle their money pretty much day to day, right? Maybe month to month, maybe year to year, but really not really past that. But the fact of the matter is, you've got to think ahead. You've got to think down the line. And that's why I wrote this book, to say, hey, we're in the middle of something right now, but guess what? When this is over, I don't want you to forget what it was like when you didn't have an emergency fund. Because you know what? In a couple more years, a hurricane will come through. You got to move to someplace else, and you've got to pay for food every day or a hotel bill. So don't live in fear, but I need you to plan, to know that something may happen in which that emergency fund becomes crucial to your life. And I don't tell anybody something that I don't do myself. In the book, I talked about the story about my daughter who was in Houston, and she had a collapsed lung. And if anybody has had anybody who's in the hospital, you know that you want to be by their bedside. Now, during the pandemic, that was much more difficult, but in normal times, you're there. And every time anybody in my family, my children, my husband in the hospital, I'm there every single day. I take off from work and I sit there, even if I have to take my computer into the hospital room, which is what I did. My husband and I got on the plane the next morning. And you can imagine what that plane ticket cost. And we were staying there for about 2 weeks to take care of my daughter while she was in the hospital and when she came out. that means that was some money. But we have prepared for this collapse lung without knowing that it was going to be a collapse lung.
We've all been through, it feels like, something like that more often than not here lately. And that's a great example of things that are out of our control. And, you think about things over these recent years, maybe decades now, that have outsized impacts on our personal finances. We talk about little inflation, but there's been a lot of inflation in healthcare expenses. We have a lot of exposure to healthcare costs, the rising cost of education, as well as shelter. Those are not low inflation parts of the economy. And, you can have a modest, not a near death experience in healthcare and be out thousands of dollars, right, Michelle?
That's exactly right. And I love that you mentioned that word inflation, because we don't often really talk about that. That's the number one reason why you need to invest. That is the number one reason why you need to make sure that your money is growing. You cannot put it in a mattress, And if you do, tell me where you live. When you won't be home. You've got to have that money working for yourself. And that means that you need to be informed about how to make that happen so that you don't take on more risk than you can tolerate. And so I talk about inflation all the time. As much as I talk about a retirement or 401k, that is in my arsenal of words to use, because I'm trying to get people to understand the power of inflation. And again, I love that you pointed out that when we look at inflation overall, it's been low. But when you take out sectors, it has not been. People don't kind of get that. And it's my job and your job through this, broadcast, to let people know that we're here to help you to explain this. You are not by yourself. There's so many of us in this industry who simply want to help you prepare for this. Now, you may not be able to. It's like a storm. The storm will come through, you put sandbags by your door and you hope it'll hold the water back. But some water sometimes gets in, and that's okay. That's out of your control. But at least you have the sandbags. And the sandbags is a metaphor for retirement, emergency fund, something I call a life happens fund, which is another savings account. There's oftentimes people have an emergency fund, and it's just a slush fund, because money slushes in and it slushes out, so that when you actually lose your job, the money's not there because you've been using it for a car repair or your kid breaks the dishwasher. You need another smaller fund to take care of those things so you don't dip into that. I call it the dire fund, which is the emergency fund.
Another of your mantras here gets the idea of having a budget, knowing the money that's coming in, knowing the money that essentially is going out on a regular basis. And I've taken this one to heart after the first time I heard you use it in my presence, and that was live beneath your means. I think if everybody lived by that mantra, they would have more savings. They'd be more mindful of the money that's essentially going out of their pocket or their bank account. So what does that really mean?
So it simply means, let's just be like a simple example. So if you make $100, you should not be spending $100. You should be really spending more like $70. And that difference, that gap, should be going to your emergency fund, the life happens fund, retirement, if you have children, college savings. And so oftentimes, all of us, when you start out, you're making no money. And somehow you were able to survive. You ate, you had a place to live. But as soon as you start making more money, you start to elevate your lifestyle. You want a bigger house, you want a better car, you want more clothes. And that's living above your means. And some people say, well, I made $100 and I spent $100. Isn't that prudent? And it is not, because you don't calculate that life happens, y'all. And so my husband and I, throughout, from the first time we got married, we always, whatever we got, we kept our lifestyle lower than our income would suggest. So for example, when we went to buy our first house together, the banker kept saying, "Oh, you can afford more house," or looking at our gross income and the ratios that they've used. And I looked at this man, I said, "You're using my gross income. Do you know that I don't bring home my gross income? I understand how this formula works. I'm not, I'm educated. I got 2 degrees, except I don't bring all that money home. And your calculations don't include the fact that I was taking care of my disabled brother. It doesn't include that I send money off to my godmother to help pay for her medicine. It doesn't include the fact that I want to put money aside once we have children to send them to college. Your formula does not include that I got to put money in an emergency fund. And so that's living below your means. It's taking that number, that $100, and sectioning it off so that you are only really living on 60 or 70. And if you do that when you start out, so when you get a raise, you keep living on the old salary and you use that raise to secure your future. And so whenever we don't sort of jump around when I get a raise around here, we like, what pot is it going into to help secure our future and our children's future as well?
Michelle Singletary of The Color of Money, The Washington Post. Look for the book, What to Do with Your Money When Crisis Hits, a Survival Guide. Michelle, thanks for joining us.
Oh, it's been my pleasure.
Stay safe, take good care. I'm Mark Hamrick. Thanks for watching.